A heads up that we recorded this episode around this time last year. At this difficult time in the wake of the terrible Bondi shooting, we acknowledge the traumatic events of that day, the irrevocable impact to so many and the loss of many innocent lives. Pippa especially feels the impacts being a Sydney-sider herself. This podcast has been made with the intent to help people through their various types of grief, but I certainly acknowledge there isn't much that can compare to an event, a public and violent event such as that, and those that take place around the world and the generational trauma and grief experienced by many. On this episode, we talk about pet grief and other themes of loss. If it's not the right time to listen to this today, maybe come back another time. Hello, and thank you for joining me on this podcast, From Experience, the Grief Collection. I'm your host, Bianca Welsh. I'm a mum, a lost mum, a restaurateur with a behavioural science degree, and a proclivity for all things to do with trauma, grief, and mental illness. I've got a lot of personal lived experience, and this is the podcast I wish I had after experiencing my own grief and loss. So why would I do a grief podcast? What might I add to the vast podcast world? I'll provide you with stories that might help you feel seen, feel less alone in what you're experiencing or have experienced, perhaps an idea on how to navigate the healing journey, because there's no playbook for grief. There's no guide. We all grieve differently, thus we all heal differently. Perhaps you're helping support someone on their grief and loss journey. Maybe you're just curious about how some people overcome the worst time of their lives. The thing with grief is that this is the one given in life. It is the one thing we will all experience at some point, the loss of someone or something that we love. As the great wordsmith and musician that is Nick Cave quotes in a letter to a fellow griever, if we love, we grieve. That's the deal. That's the pact. Grief and love are forever intertwined. Grief is the terrible reminder of the depths of our love, and, like love, grief is non-negotiable. End quote. Yet we rarely talk about it in the Western world. We're never prepared for it, but perhaps we can never be prepared for it. I wasn't, but I hope if we were more open to talking about it and aware of other people's journeys and stories, we might feel less alone in the dark depths of grief, and perhaps the healing journey might not feel as daunting. I acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the original owners of this island, Trawana Lutruwita, Tasmania. I'm on the country where the Taranata Panir, Paninaher and Lita Myarina clans of the Stony Creek Nation converged. I pay my respects to elders past and present and recognise the deep connection to the land and waterways. I express my gratitude in being able to live, work and play on this beautiful country. Sovereignty was never ceded. I honour the rich tradition of storytelling as a vital way of passing down knowledge, culture and history through generations. On today's episode, we get to have an amazing chat with Pippa Dickson. Pippa now resides in Sydney but hails from WA. She moved to Tasmania to study furniture design at School of Art at UTAS and has an honours and PhD in furniture design. She has sat on and chaired numerous boards and spearheaded GASP, which is the Glenorchy Art and Sculpture Park, a significant project for the Hobart area and a lasting legacy of the way Pippa gets things done. She recently worked with Asia Link and is a mentor to many in the arts industry and is a dear friend of mine. Welcome, Pippa.
Thanks, Bianca. I'm also on Gadigal land today and I'd like to acknowledge the peoples from here.
Thank you. So, Pippa, I've very kindly asked you to join me today to talk about your grief journey. I was particularly drawn to your recent loss of your beautiful dog, Art, and communicating that significant loss. And as we've discussed in the lead up to our talk, was how pet grief is not really talked about enough or acknowledged enough.
Yeah, that's one of the first things I did, not just after Art died, but in the lead up to that, because I knew she was dying for a little while, was look for material to understand what it is that this this thing called grief and other people's experiences of it, because I wasn't really sure if what I was feeling was what everyone feels. And I think that's sort of really quite critical to this conversation, is trying to place our grief in amongst our peers and friends and colleagues and family and greater society. Like, is what I'm feeling what everyone else feels? And if it is, then how do people move through that and, for want of a better phrase, sort of come out another side when it feels too overwhelming? I heard so many people just sort of talk about losing a pet and getting another one really quickly, or sort of being able to move on in a way that I didn't feel I had the capacity to. And then non-pet owners can be, for no fault of their own, just through lack of lived experience, probably quite dismissive of that sort of grief, or minimizing it, I guess, by suggesting you might just get another one, a replacement pet, or that sort of idea. So I couldn't work out if sometimes I felt silly for how I was feeling, but the depth of that love was fairly evident to anyone who knew me. And not everyone who met Art loved her, because she didn't love everyone either. But she was such a precious, precious soul. And because she, I think, had been there for me in times of deep grief in my life, there was more wrapped up in it. She represented a lot more than just my companion and pet. She was my support person, really, in many times. I wouldn't go as far as to say she was a therapy dog, but she was certainly my support. Yeah.
And there's just so much to unpack there. One, acknowledge how the weight of the loss of Art and how much that has impacted you. I want to start with, what were the things you were feeling, and what helped in understanding that other people were feeling the way you were feeling about losing her, and then when you lost her?
It's so funny also, the words, the language that we use, because just the word lost, after she died, and I can talk a bit about that, but after that, I had a number of dreams where she was alive and I literally lost her in a busy place, like in a market was one of them, and sort of on a street, and I mean, in all sorts of weird places that I didn't recognize. They might have even been places overseas that I'd visited, just chaotic, busy places where she had got away from me, or I'd lost her and I was calling after her, trying to find her, searching for her. So that word lost is very powerful, because that's actually how I felt, because it was almost wrapped up in my guilt around my responsibility. Yeah, I thought that I had done something wrong, that I'd taken my eyes off the ball, that I had lost her. Oh, there's so many feelings wrapped up in the process of her being unwell, so the lead up to her dying. And of course, like so many pets, she was euthanized because she was really not doing well. And in many ways, it was sort of easy to make the decision, or not easy, but I knew it was coming. So it felt like the most humane thing to do. And actually, a few days before she died, a couple of really strange things happened. She'd been unwell for a couple of months, and she was able to walk around and she was still eating, although the last few weeks were really, really difficult. And she would only eat if I hand fed her. So it felt very personal and very reliant on me keeping her alive as well, which was another story, I guess. But I went out, it was a full moon, and I had to go to an event, and she was really sleeping a lot at that point. And so I could leave her, say, on the bed, and know that she wouldn't try, because she was getting quite frail, that it was sort of a high bed, that she wouldn't try and jump off, because she was really sleeping a lot and she was comfortable. So I didn't want to move her. So I was only going to go out for an hour or two maximum and come home. And I've done this many times, but I left her. She was sound asleep and very comfortable. And then when I was out, about 45 minutes to an hour into being out, I just had this overwhelming sense of urgency and panic. I got like anxiety about her, and I just had to go home. I felt something's happened, you know. So I said to Mark, my partner, and another friend I was with at the time, I have to go. I'm really sorry. I'm going now. Like, it was urgent. And I called an Uber and I left the event. And when I got home, she was not on the bed. She'd jumped off the bed and she was in shock, standing, sort of still standing quite still. And she had a bad back, so it would have probably hurt her as well. When I got home, and she looked scared, but she looked so happy to see me as well, and that she had communicated that with me. It was really powerful. So that was interesting. And it was around that time that I was like, okay, she's really trying to communicate with me. This is what's going on. I remember sitting on the couch and holding her. You know, as they call it, a dead weight, and things seem so much heavier when there's no life left, no heartbeat left. But I had her, she was still alive, and she was just light as a feather and sort of floppy on me. It felt almost like, in hindsight, it was actually not at the time. At the time, I thought it was very odd and I was really holding her. But then afterwards, a few days later, when she did die, I thought it was almost like that was when she died. So the last few days, she was really just breathing. She was still actually eating a little bit and drinking and things, but I felt like that was her time when she said, okay, this is it. And then she slowly just let go. But obviously, it's not like that when they're euthanized, because you are making a decision and it's very conscious. So there was a lot of feelings. There was so many feelings. And then afterwards, the overarching feeling was of guilt. Was it the right thing? Even though it was so clear she wasn't going to live forever. But so much guilt, not just about that decision, but about all the time I wanted back. So all the time that I hadn't been at home, or I'd traveled, or which was a lot, right? I was commuting for work for 4.5 years. I just wanted it all back. Yeah, every second. Yeah.
Oh, that's a lot. Pippa, it makes me, your description of that time makes me quite emotional. Because the love, I can just feel the weight of that love. And I fully agree with you about the words lost. For me, because we had to force the hand of death, that you didn't lose them as such. You had to go through the motions of arranging the vet to come and do XYZ, and you had to make a payment for that and probably sign a form, and there's these processes that make it feel like it is your decision, but it's a decision that you make with love and compassion, but it still comes with a lot of guilt. It's quite hard to describe, I think, to people that perhaps haven't had to make those decisions, but it was a choiceless choice. You knew she was communicating with you. You knew that that was the right thing to do, but it comes with the weight of that it was your decision. And your description of how her soul left her body, you just knew. It's really moving, but I think it's so special that you were there for that. And she trusted you, and you had that connection.
Yeah. I think also then afterwards, I was a mess, right? I couldn't get out of bed for at least 3 days. And I had some really good friends who were checking in and sending me beautiful things to listen to. And some of it was too hard, some of it was too emotional. I just had so much emotion. The first morning after she died, I could have sworn she was on the bed. Like, I felt the weight of her body next to my leg where she would sleep. And she would do this thing where she would shake and her little name tag would jingle, on her neck. And she would do this shake and this jingle would happen. And it was like, I'm awake. Okay, where are you all? Come on, let's go. And I heard it. It was so sharp, the sound. Like it was so clear that I actually woke me up. And I said to oh my God, did you hear that? Like it was so profoundly clear. And I just would wake up, I'd just cry then. I'd just be like crying. I'd just wake up in tears and dreaming about her. And the other weird thing that happened was in the process of the decision making around the vet being there, and it was being very obvious that she was going to be euthanized, there wasn't any question about it. They had this beautiful vet company called Rest Your Paws who come to your home and so compassionate. They have these wonderful vets and they just spend time with you. That there's no rushing. It's just they light a candle and then they offer you a small locket of their hair to keep and a paw print or something if you like it. And I said no, because I just couldn't cope with these ideas of it being a paw print of her dead body. And I just, for me at that time, I was like, no, it feels macabre, it feels wrong. I just know. And it was a really physical thing. But like literally, as soon as they left with her body, that was so sweet. They took her out in a bed or covered in a blanket with a flower they'd picked from a nearby garden. And it was just so beautiful. And they left with her straight away. I was like, no, I want the hair. I want the footprint. I want everything. And I was too late. And that was it. And I didn't follow up because I just thought, oh no, it was too hard to contact them. I don't know. I just felt like a bit overwhelmed with it all. But I regretted that as well. So I had this guilt. I had all of this strange guilt. And then I was having her cremated and I wanted her ashes. And they have all of this beautiful service that you can have, types of urns or boxes or bags or however you'd like them contained and returned to you. And again, I went for the very lowest end little bag with her ashes. And it's so funny because, I mean, seriously, Bianca, this was a dog that I was spending before her death probably close to $500 a week on, right? She was having acupuncture. She was going to the vet weekly. She was having all this herbal remedies plus medication. She was getting the most exceptional care she probably could have. Her diet, she was eating small portions of Scotch fillet steak, you know. But then when it came to her death, I was like, I don't want any of that stuff. It's meaningless in the context of her life. And I wasn't angry. I was more overwhelmed and sad. But in the context of her life, those things just seemed meaningless to me. And then, of course, didn't. As soon afterwards, it just changed. I was so curious at how quickly things looked differently and seemed different. And I think the most profound thing was how deep I personally went on an existential length to sort of understand my own feelings, other people's in relationship to death. I kept asking people. My husband had his late wife died of cancer, and we'd talked a long time ago when we first met about that, about his grief over years, etc. And I revisited all of that. I was asking the questions again because I was like, how do people get through this? It's not a human death, it's a small animal. So how do you even measure that in the context of his loss and his family's loss, the mother of his children, etc. So I felt silly, but I felt that it was equivalent.
And I couldn't agree more, because the symbolic nature of pets often come about because we're not able to have children, or maybe some people are not close with their family, or they don't have that great friends, or I think I want to talk to you more about how you were surprised by how much it impacted you, because do you think that is just this societal nature and expectation that we just treat pet death as so trivial, and that's why when it actually happens to us, that it is just as potentially more impactful than sometimes some humans in our lives dying.
I just think it might come down to something as simple as not everyone has a pet or has experienced that love of a pet, and maybe they don't love animals as much. I can't imagine a place that people don't love animals, but maybe there's people like that. But certainly not everyone has a pet, and certainly not everyone loves dogs, for example. So they don't have that level of understanding or compassion when it comes to it. But certainly dog lovers and pet lovers, animal lovers, totally get it. And my mum actually said, I'm sure she would retract this if I died, but she said, I think it's much harder losing your pet than it is a human often. And I was like, wow, okay, that was about the closest I'd had to anyone expressing it in the way that I was feeling. And then a very good friend of mine recently lost her gorgeous old dog. And she said that she was sort of describing her moving in the world in ways that were sort of not fitting in, and maybe driving slightly erratically or forgetting to indicate or bumping into people or those sorts of things, and apologizing straight away. But my dog died, my dog died, my dog just died. And people mostly were like, got it. And it just makes you wonder how many people in the world are moving around with this type of grief, and we beep our horn at them, or someone beats their horn at us, and just all those irritations. I mean, Sydney's hyper, by the way, on this. And I wonder what it would be like if we all went around with the lens of what grief is that person feeling. Yeah.
That's right. And I guess from my education and interest in the trauma area, I've always wondered, like, what happened to you? Why are you responding the way you are? And it can be really hard when you're in your own struggles. And I know that through my journey with Herb and going back to work in the restaurant was really challenging when I had a challenging customer. And I would try and reflect and go, well, I don't know what happened in their day. And I would reflect and I'd think to myself, well, perhaps their dog died, perhaps their mum died, perhaps they've got some childhood trauma and something's triggered them today. And I think we all need to be a lot more compassionate and caring and wonder what we all carry, these deep wounds and scars. And I can wholeheartedly say that we lost our dog, Frank, just before Herb was going to turn 1, and I was like, you're fucking kidding me, the timing of that. And he just got sick really quickly. It was within less than 48 hours that we chose to have him put down because he was just not going to recover. He was about to turn 14, and the vet just said, we don't think he's going to make it through the night. And the grief we went through was it was just as messed up and just as fucked as losing our son, just in a different way. But it still had this incredible weight. The way our brains work in terms of grief, it's actually in the motivational state of our brain rather than it being in that sort of amygdala emotional part of our brain. So it's a part of our brain where we want to do, we want to change, we're yearning, we're motivated to change. And so grief activates in that part of our brain and comes in different dimensions as opposed to the stages of grief, which is still relevant to a degree, and it helped a lot of people understand grief. But we now know that we don't go through all those stages of grief and it's not linear. But grief is in time, space and closeness, dimensions of grief rather than it being a linear trajectory. And when you've got so much time with this pet or human, 10, 14, 16 years with a pet, and they've been at your feet all that time, the smells, the habits, the daily routines you've got with them, to unbreak that and unpick that's no longer there. I had the same experience as you. I was certain I heard him shake because his name tags and dog tag did the same thing. It made this very distinct sound, and I was certain I heard that. And because he used to sleep on our bed, I used to wake up in the middle of the night thinking that he was there, and that kind of waned in the first few weeks, and I was just like, I wonder if it's kind of just his presence lingering to say that he's okay. And then they've gone to that next world, and I've never been a spiritual person until I've experienced grief in the way we have. And now I choose to fully subscribe to that. And I know you do, and you always have. I find it fascinating how so many people will just be quite dismissive of the loss of a pet. If it's okay to go there, I wanted to ask you about your experience of trying to have a baby as you met the great Mark later in life, and the challenges that came with. And was art, like your love of a child and the love you have for your partner, now husband, in the symbolicness of your pet?
Yeah, art was probably 5 or 6 or something when we were having IVF treatment, and I just found it so profoundly difficult, to be honest. And I really couldn't face the failure of it, and the odds were quite low, I guess. So for us, I stopped, and at that time, art was with me, and I remember she wasn't allowed on the bed at that point. It's absurd to think of that now because that changed rapidly at one point in time. But Mark was at work that day and I got her on the bed with me. She jumped up actually and she just knew. They're so intuitive. I remember saying to her, "You're my baby, aren't you?" And she's just like, it was almost like talking to me, like nodding. I could almost feel her just like nodding, you know? There was a lot of grief around that, but I also didn't want to burden her and put all of this on her either, this weight of things. That she was such a gift because she was so full of life and attitude. And I love that. She really gave me so much joy. She fully knew that she was my baby or our baby, and also, I'm pretty sure, didn't realize she was actually a dog. She really thought she was human in many ways. She really just gave me so much. And in her death, as you just so poignantly said, the gift was understanding trauma and grief a lot better. And what I was saying before about this sort of sense of compassion and moving through the world, understanding grief, it's like that lived experience we mentioned earlier. You really do, I think, need to experience it to be able to practice it. And even though I've lost many people in my life through all sorts of circumstances, and some have hit me very, very, very deeply, I think this was the first time that I went so existentially into the idea of death. And this year hasn't been a great year. I've lost many very close people to me, starting with art as a little person dog and then moving to mentors and friends. I think the whole year has been wrapped up in understanding this. And so there's interesting, don't you think, how in life there seems to be a juncture or a pivot point in which you just have more clarity to understand who you are, where you are, what you've come, how you've come to this point. And then art's gift to me was, I guess, accelerating some of the questions I'd started to ask around my life in the last few years. But that point, that transition was really difficult, and my mental health wasn't good as a result at the beginning of this year. It's not that much easier now, but it is. It's just different. And we've decided now to adopt another fur baby, and little Nix will come in January. And it feels very important to me. She's not also feeling sort of burdened by our loss and grief for art. But the other night, actually, you would appreciate this. I called Nix art. I was talking about Nix with Mark, and I called her art by accident, and I caught myself immediately. And Mark said, "Don't worry, it's just a name, and she will always feel the depth of that love." And I didn't even know who he was talking about, whether he was talking about art or Nix, but it actually didn't matter because it was the same both ways.
That's very profound.
He's very good on death, Mark.
He is.
Very, very good. I have to say, actually, just on grief, sometimes I think people find it very hard to talk about as well. And as I mentioned, quite a few people have died in our life this year who we were close to. I'm always quick to send people a message and tell them I'm thinking about them and that I love them and offer any support that I can. And then I will ask Mark, oh, did you message them or check in with him? He's like, yes, yes. And he's just really quiet about it. He hasn't told me he's done it, but he's done it. And I said to him once, could I have a look at your message? And he showed me his phone and could not believe the words of an angel. I was like, how does anyone think to say such poetry? There's a couple of times this has happened actually this year, and it was amazing because it made me stop and go, okay, before you write a message, just be. It's like a meditation, right? Create a space and let the words come rather than just writing the usual words that people write. And that has helped a lot. But it was Mark, and his words are just so beautiful around death.
He's a
Yeah.
special one, Mark. That's why we love him a lot.
Yeah.
Talking about getting another dog, and you've got a profound story as to why you've chosen the name that you have, which I think is really special to share. Do you find that some people judge getting another dog as though it's a replacement?
Look, some of my good friends would encourage me to get another dog as a replacement, like quite deliberately so, because they could see the extent of the grief and that would be a tonic. And for many people, it is. And I've seen that with lots of my friends who have adopted new pets quite soon afterwards, and no judgment. I mean, great. Actually, I wish I could have adopted another baby earlier, but I actually just needed to do this work, to be honest. And it's just when it is, it's a process. And also Mark, there's two people in this. I think people treated it in one hand like a tonic to help and soothe. And on the other hand, there's the other end of the spectrum too, which is like, why would you get another dog?
Yep.
I mean, I asked myself the same thing. The idea of not being able to have an actual baby and not wanting to keep trying because of the grief around the disappointment of it not working and the failure. I was like, can I handle this level of attachment again? And what will happen when they die? But actually, it was like, I think this is making me stronger in some way. And also, we balanced out the pros and cons of not having a dog, and it was the whole of not having one was bigger than the grief actually. So that made that easier. But yeah, yeah, it's funny what people will say and societal expectations, and also because they are a commitment, of course. And are you ready to make that commitment? It's all tied up with what you're doing for work or where you live or all of those sorts of things. So why would you get one now? Don't get one now. Why would you get one at all? Why haven't you got one already? You should get one. So many competing things. And at the end of the day, you just got to block out the noise.
That's right. And I think we can very easily try and feel like we've got control over life and control over our decisions. And I know for us in having another baby after we lost Herb was a huge roll of the dice. But we're like, well, if this happens and we have a healthy baby, what says that one of us isn't going to walk out on the street and get hit by a bus? Or, that life is a gift. I understand the fear of going, well, we're going to go through this heartbreak again. And, we're the same. We're tossing up whether or not we get another dog. But I don't think that should ever stop us in doing something that we love and that brings us love and joy.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. And you mentioned about names and honoring the memory and what that means. The art, I called her art because I like the sound of it. I mean, I like art, obviously, in the art world per se, but it wasn't about that sort of art. I just liked the name. And then someone I knew actually said, oh, does it stand for Artemis? And it's funny, I was thinking about this earlier, how names sometimes evolve as well, and their meaning can change. So I was really open to that. When they said that, I became curious, and I didn't know much about Greek mythology. And then, like most things, I became obsessed with it. And I started reading and researching more about Greek mythology. And this was some time ago initially. And I was like, oh, yeah, she is Artemis, the goddess of the hunt. She really was. She was uncontrollable and she loved to chase things. I loved all of that about her. But it was also goddess of the moon, which for anyone who knows me knows that's a symbol that I really revere and I pay homage to every month. And I just thought this is perfect for art. And then there were lots of things that happened around the moon that night of the full moon before she died. And I counted the moons often around her and what was happening for her as well and in our lives. And it was profound, actually. So being goddess of the moon felt good. And then once we had sort of started to commit to the idea of a new dog, I put forward some names to mark. And I was looking at Greek gods and goddesses. And we didn't really mind what sex the dog was, although I have to say I did have a bias for another girl. And I didn't know about Nyx, NYX, the goddess of the night, and primordial goddess. And I just was like, that is the perfect name. I love it. 3 letters like art, it feels strong and powerful like art, Nyx. And it feels sort of slightly androgynous, again, like art. I gave Mark a choice actually of some names and he picked it. And I was so happy because it was the best name. He chose the best name. And then I started doing more reading about Nyx and I did actually have a little bit of fear. I was like, uh-oh, what am I conjuring here? The goddess of the night. Is she ever going to sleep? Is she going to be like terror at nighttime? What's going to happen? And then I read somewhere else that in the Temple of Artemis in Greece, there's a statue of Nyx. And I went, just had goosebumps. But the other thing is that Nyx is the symbol of the dark moon, not the full moon. And I love the dark moon energy, actually, much more profoundly even than the full moon often. And then I found out that Nyx was actually born on the dark moon. So she's probably 6 weeks or something old at the moment. And she was born on the dark moon. And the day that we committed, like spoke to the breeder and actually committed was a full moon. And I was like, this is just coming into fruition. The light is shining and we're getting little nicks. And it was just felt all the stars were aligned. It was beautiful.
And do you find all those things help with your healing? Like they give meaning?
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It feels aligned. It feels like it's fated in a way. And I know many people might not believe in that, but I think there is a lot that happens in the world and I do believe in mystics. So I think it's important for me that there feels like there's a greater force around this and it's destined in a way. So I'm looking forward to what lessons are next in store.
Pippa, what are some of the other things that have helped you heal in the process of losing art?
Swimming, being in the water, crying, talking about her, using her name, listening to podcasts and reading about grief and death and talking to people. I've had some really beautiful conversations with people about death this year. And I've also been dealing with my own depression and thinking about my own life. It's been really interesting. And I'm having Mark to share with. Like often we're sitting on the couch watching a movie or something, we'll both say, oh, we miss having art. And it's nice. It feels nice to have someone who you can say that to and then go, yeah, me too. That shared nature of the grief is beautiful. I feel very lucky that Mark has always been in that space with me. And he will always respond in a really beautiful way, not in any way sort of like get over it. There's never any of that.
Do you think though that you grieved at a different pace almost in a different way?
Definitely. And I don't know why. I mean, it might be because everyone is different, and sometimes I wonder because he's experienced such profound grief in his life, whether he comes at it differently or he's able to move through it differently. I'm not sure, but whether it's he's a man and I'm not, like, what is it? I don't know. But he seemed more capable and mature, where I felt like a puddle. But then I know that he was really hurting too on many occasions. I think we just all have different ways of showing it. And I saw my mum and my dad when they lost their beautiful pets and the grief that they had as well. And then also with new pets that they were adopting, and then the joy as well. So I'm looking forward to that stage now, which is the joyfulness around the life. Yeah, I'm ready. Ready.
Amazing. We had a very brief discussion about how social media has worked for the good for you in this process. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, isn't social media amazing? I mean, it's so good for some things and so bad for other things. With the Rest Your Paws organisation who does the home euthanasia I mentioned, one of the things I'm glad I didn't dismiss outright in all of those decisions about Art's death was joining their Facebook community and sharing. And the day after Art died, I wrote for social media what felt like a long piece as a tribute to her, and shared that also with the community online, the Rest Your Paws community. And it was so beautiful. People really responded, but I'm still a member of that group, and I try to interact with other people's stories as often as possible. It's really interesting to me. I find it really helpful to go deep, as I said, and to think about the names and the symbolism and to draw references from different things and to make connections to different things around their life and death. And other people are just simple statements. I had my beautiful dog for 15 years, or cat, or whatever it might be, and just how profoundly sad they are or how guilty they feel. And that's simply it. And they post a photo. And I really feel that as much as you do the long ones about all the things they did together or the sharing. Sometimes the really short and simple statements really hit me, because I just think, it's almost like you just don't have the words. How can you ever do it justice, the depth of the relationship and with any words, actually? And then in the dog world, people talk about this rainbow bridge that dogs cross over. Is it just in the dog world?
Well, look, in the baby loss world as well, you have your rainbow baby, but personally, and I respect those that do call them their rainbow babies, but I don't love the rainbow baby thing. In the baby loss world, it's about you've weathered a storm, so the rainbow comes out after the storm. And I choose not to. I mean, the whole process with Herb was a fucking storm, but I don't want to acknowledge that that's what it was. It was more than that. So I personally don't love the rainbow term, but I know that a lot of people get a lot of joy or healing from it.
So interesting. I didn't really understand it. I've heard it a lot in the dog world, the rainbow bridge, crossing the rainbow bridge. And so when Art died, I did a meditation and I saw her not on a rainbow bridge, but on a gold encrusted path, like the Wizard of Oz, right? But it was sort of sparkly gold. And she was running around and running down it and having a lovely time. And she was chasing a butterfly. Oh, there were a number of butterflies around her, which she did in real life. And I was like so happy to have that vision of her. And we have this, she was a salt and pepper schnauzer, and we have this, I don't know what they're called, but in Sydney, these big black and white butterflies in the garden, quite large. And every time I see one, they come around at this time of year, which is the time she was getting sick, and January she died. So I see one come. I always think it's the same one, but I always think it's art. But I also project that it's art. Crows and ravens are also art. That you just, in your mind, see them embodied everywhere.
Yeah, I love that. I just wanted to circle back for 1 second and acknowledge you mentioned about all the things that the paw print and the lock of hair and stuff. And if you don't know, you don't know. And I think that's why I'm passionate about sharing these sorts of stories, because I know for us it was like, what do we do to make memories in this short time that we have with our son? We have 2 days in the hospital and he's not alive. What can we do? We had an amazing midwife that really guided us through. If we didn't have her, we wouldn't have known. So she encouraged us to wash his hair, cut a lock of hair, get handprints, footprints, all the things. And then the same with our dog. Our vet just sent us a beautiful card, a sympathy card with his nose print and his paw print and some hair. And I was just like, I was beside myself when we picked up his ashes. But like they just did that. And I'm really grateful for that, because I wouldn't have known to have asked for that. And so in the hospital, all the different things that we did with our son, I know that many others in the baby loss community feel a lot of guilt about not having made those memories and have had those opportunities because they didn't know. And so the more that we hear these stories and in the depth of the traumatic nature of what's going on, if there's this little background memory like, oh, I heard this story of we should get this now and process it later because we'll regret not having it. And I think that's a really important part of your story and many others' stories. What you don't know, you don't know. And you shouldn't penalise yourself for that. It's so easy to go back and regret and say you wish things were different, but you can't go back in time.
Indeed.
You said you loved books and podcasts. Are there a couple that spring to mind that helped you through your grief that you turned to?
I listened to the Emerald podcast, and the one in particular that a friend shared with me was on trauma and the vegetation gods. And I listened to that actually the day before Art died as almost a preparation for a reminder of the cycle of life. And I just cried. Like, it was a really beautiful, he just produces the most beautiful podcasts. And a book, and I don't have it in front of me and I can't remember what it was called, nor can I remember who wrote it, on dogs, but I can share that with you later if you have a link for things. But also Laurie Anderson, I listened to and watched her film on her dog, and it was so beautiful. Talk about seeing eye to eye with other living beings and living entities. Just made me so happy that there were other people in the world who feel as strongly about their dogs and their pets as I did. And Laurie Anderson, just as a Buddhist as well, she just has this profound way of talking about death. And the death that she described with her dog was very different. And it wouldn't have been the way that I would have carried it either. But it was a beautiful film, and that was very special.
Amazing. Well, I will link all those in the show notes. Do you have a particular thing you would say to yourself if you could go back in the depth of losing Art to comfort you, to get you to where you are now? Is there a statement you would say to yourself?
Be with it. You know, be with it, be in the moment, be with the feelings. Yeah. And know that those feelings are literally the depth of the love.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and congratulations. This is a beautiful idea.
Thank you. And I look forward to hearing all about Nix.
Yeah, don't worry. You'll be inundated with videos and photos and all the rest.
Thank you.
Lots of love. Bye.
Joining me to unpack the last interview is Dr. Mai Frandsen. She is a psychologist, health behaviour change consultant and researcher based in Tasmania. She earned her PhD in psychology in 2012 and is internationally recognised for her work in promoting health behaviour change using incentives. Dr. Frandsen is the owner of Trig Psychology, a private practice located in Tasmania, where she focuses on health behaviour change, working with first responders, adolescents and adults navigating significant life transitions. Her approach is characterised by authenticity and pragmatism, drawing from her varied life experiences. She uses a range of psychological treatment paradigms to get the best outcome for her clients. In addition to her private practice, Dr. Frandsen serves as a psychologist in schools and is an associate researcher at the University of Tasmania. Her research primarily focuses on smoking cessation, particularly among pregnant women, and has led Tasmania-wide clinical trials exploring the efficacy of novel, incentive-based interventions. Having stepped away from active research, Mai's passion project is science communication and can often be heard on ABC Radio sharing mental health hacks. Originally from Denmark, she has called Tasmania home since 1994. Beyond her professional pursuits, she enjoys engaging in outdoor adventures, endurance sports, and travelling both locally and abroad with her sons. Welcome, Mai.
Hello, Bianca.
Thank you very much for joining me. How wonderful was our chat with Pippa?
So good.
So I love all her symbolism. I know I found that really important in my journey and still do. And I'm really grateful to have had the chat about pet grief because not enough people give it the weight that it deserves. And I think it's so easy for people to dismiss people's grief when they lose a pet.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I was even just thinking then for some people they might get 3 days bereavement leave. And yet I think if anyone said, oh, I need bereavement leave because my pet has just died, they would get laughed at. Pippa was beautiful and articulate and gave so much. But I think what I really love about this is that she opens up and gives us permission to be okay with any form of grief that we experience. And while pet grief is so common, so many people have an animal that they are super, super close with, especially dog lovers. Not biased, but dogs are better than cats. And yet it's not spoken of very often. And so I know she spoke about how finding other forums and places where she was then able to feel seen, where she didn't feel seen even amongst close friends. And what it got me thinking, so much stuff to talk about, but what it got me thinking about is the grief itself. And now I think what most people are familiar with is because it's socially accepted to grieve in a public way when someone passes away, another human passes away, and more commonly now maybe animals as well. But when a human passes away, it's announced in the newspaper. We go to a building or we have a ceremony, we gather people around. It's acceptable to cry during that time and then everyone needs to go and get happy afterwards, right? So that's something that's more socially acceptable. And yet the other grief that might not be as tactile or socially acceptable, it's not given the space. And I think that's a detriment to us as a society, but also definitely to the person who's going through that grief and doesn't feel like they can feel it. And so I guess some examples would be absolutely a pet. But I was also thinking, especially the people who come through my door, my favourite place to work is with people going through transitions, life transitions, because that's when things get difficult, right? And there's a lot of stuff to do with our identity. And just coming to mind, like people who are grieving children leaving home. And interesting, we talked about Melody, that anticipatory grief of, oh my God, what's going to happen when this person leaves the house? And it's not just the grief of that, but it's the grief of the identity. And thinking about people who are made redundant or who have to leave a job or have to leave a country, something has been lost, right? And it's not just that thing, job, pet, person, whatever, but it's all the stuff that's wrapped up in that. And I think this is why, depending on where we are in the stage of our life, that experience will never be the same. So if you lose that person, lose that pet now, your response and your grief will be very different to if that happened in 10 years' time. So absolutely not, taking anything away from the loss that we feel from that person or pet or thing. But a lot of it is to do with what does that mean to me? Who is that gap, that hole that's made for me? A lot of it's identity. It's the memories. It's the companionship potentially. It's the sense of purpose. And I loved, I think it was you, might have been Pippa, either way, you're both brilliant, that metaphor of it's like, pulling a thread of your life, right? And that thread touches so many things. And I think that's the interesting stuff as well, to look at what did that represent for you? What are you grieving?
I think that's so interesting, you pointing out that we don't have funerals, we don't have a ceremony for our pets. That's public. or really ever done. We just picked up our dog's ashes from the vet and that was it. And ceremonies are so important to the grieving process. I'm sure there's probably an industry out there of pet funerals happening, but it's not that common, is it?
No, I think it's changing. Like the more and more, like we spoke before we started rolling, we've had some animal deaths in our life more recently, and it's really lovely to know that there are vets now who actually come out to your house to do that sort of stuff. And also, obviously, there's the pet cremation and there's ashes and all that sort of stuff. And it was really interesting listening to Pippa about that. And I've kind of made some notes on that sense of, and I wonder if a part of it is that sense of denial of like, you know, art's gone and how dare you suggest that it's just this thing. But because it's not something that we experience, often it's not something that we do, there's not something that's the norm, right? It's becoming more and more, but that having a ceremony and acknowledging that, hopefully that'll change. I think we're a little while away before we see pet bereavement leave, but who knows?
I think I'd like to see it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even as an employer,
Yeah.
I'd like to see it. I know how important pets are, especially to some of my team. It would be a devastating loss. I just want to touch as well on your comments about that associated grief. And I was almost thinking about the 3 E's of trauma again and the parallels of it's not just the person or the event, it's actually the effect and all the secondary things that come with losing that person. And I think when it comes to a pet, you're right, that a lot of people just think it's just that the pet has died, and I feel like a lot of people think that you can just replace that. But there's a level of connection, and each pet owner would definitely say that each pet has its own personality and identity. And so it got me thinking about how all those secondary losses are still just as much in a pet loss than it is with a human and a human loss. So for us with the secondary losses, it was not witnessing brothers play together, having our sons play together. For me, like walking down the street with a pram or enjoying maternity leave with an actual baby in my arms. There's so many secondary losses. And then with a pet, it does come with that you are not a pet owner. You probably had a lot of rituals to go to the dog park or to walk down the street with them and the care, buying fancy dog food, like the ritual of caring for something else can be quite profound and a huge part of our identity. And then when that's gone, I had not given that the weight of thought that is a really important part.
And I think also what Pippa reminded me of is that sense, the timeline, right? Is that dog was there and represented so many different memorable moments. And for her, obviously, there was a monumental one around their IVF journey and ultimately deciding that there was too much. And art being a really, really important, I guess, entity in that, a presence in that, and absolutely wasn't, as people didn't want to put that weight on art, but art was there for that. Art was there for that moment. And a family pet, usually in all the pictures of the kids growing up and going first day of school, the pet's there. And so it's the timeline of important things. And I think also with pets, like, all pets are innocent. And I'm not saying humans aren't, but for a pet lover, I'm thinking of dogs, they are just completely dependent on us.
Yeah, and I think pets can be a reflection of ourselves, can't they?
Yes, absolutely. That's right. And what we want to do and go running with them and hang out in the garden and all that sort of stuff. So, yes, I think the wonderful thing about or the importance of grieving for them properly, not properly because there's no rules, but giving yourself space to grieve for that is not just grieving them, but it's grieving the things that you have lost with them now not being there. And I think it's interesting listening to all of your amazing guests and thinking about my own clients. If that grief isn't processed, it will come back.
Oh, yes.
And it'll compound in the next thing that happens, you know. And, I mean, Pippa kind of talked about that a little bit. And what I think the other bit that I'd really like to discuss with Pippa and the beautiful art was the kind of silliness, I think Pippa used that word, or the discomfort, the unknown of like, why am I feeling like this? Other people don't feel like this. Is there something wrong with me? I can feel this feeling and it's real, but like I compare it to other people, including her beautiful partner and the grief that he'd gone through, but kind of feeling silly around why am I feeling like this, right? And I think, and we've spoken in other episodes about the sense that whether it's our culture, a societal thing of not being very open with grief and it not being a normalised thing potentially in our society. I think other societies do it much, much healthier fashion. For most of us, when we go through our first big grief thing, is we have no yardstick. And as humans, we've talked about humans don't like uncertainty. So, of course, the first thing we do is kind of go, oh, how should I respond? How should I be reacting? And it might be, well, how did my parents respond? We dug a hole when Fido died and we just chucked him in the hole and away we went. Oh, okay, so maybe that's how I should respond, but it doesn't feel right because I feel monumental grief right now. So we will go back and go, can I learn anything from my past about how I should grieve, from my parents, from my friends? Okay, so what does society do? Do I get bereavement leave for my pet? No, I don't. Okay, so it mustn't be a thing. And then luckily Pippa was able to find resources and find support groups and stuff online and some good friends who would actually empathise with her. So I guess the point there is we often turn to others when we're going through this to cling on to. And the beautiful thing about humans, and why I think therapy is so wonderful, is when you are face-to-face with someone else, we are looking, whether it's a traumatic incident or whether you're really emotional, you're sitting with someone, you are looking for security in that other person. You're locking eyes with that person and you are hoping that they will keep you safe or that they're safe with you. And when you are going through your own sense of grief and you don't have a similar experience with someone else, that can be really scary. And if you don't, then please reach out and find someone or something, resources. And I know she'll put beautiful, relevant resources to each of these wonderful conversations. But I guess my point being, the reason you feel even more uncertain and hurt is if you don't know who to go to, or I guess somewhere to lock eyes on to feel calm and to feel like there is another way, there is an end to this big black tunnel that you might find yourself in.
I think we could do a whole episode on attachment and that safety and the importance of that. And I have been reflecting myself recently on what did help through the journey. How am I able to do this or stand up in front of a room and talk about our loss and talk about what's happened? And I really think that it is that connectedness. It is the people that could empathise with me because they were actually going through the same thing, either roughly at the same time or had been through similar. It was those people that got me through and gave me that safety.
And was it helpful that that community included people who were at the same stage but also other people who were, and I think we've spoken before about the relief you felt when you met with people who had been through what you'd been through but they'd come out the other side?
Absolutely. I needed the whole volume.
The whole spectrum.
The whole spectrum. I needed volume 1, 2, 3, 4 and 30. Yeah. I needed my very close friend Emily, who will be on this podcast, that because we were only a few months apart from losing our boys, they were both our second child. They were both boys as well, which, I don't know, there was just a sense of camaraderie that we had, and we could just message each other with a random thought, something we were pissed off about that day. Someone said something to us and it upset us, and we were both exactly aligned in the way we perceived those situations, because not everyone does perceive things in the way we do. Yep. And then to, see other people further down the track, 1, 2, 5, 10, 30 years plus, and to hear about their experiences, which is, I guess, is the whole point of why I'm wanting to do this, is because those experiences gave me hope and gave me perhaps a blueprint then of what to do next.
I think the two things there is when you speak of Emily and being able to pick up a phone and express yourself with honesty, there was that sense of safety, that there was going to be no judgment because you could be absolutely sure that your honesty with her in that moment, you were safe because of her experience. So the safety in having people who've had a similar experience. We like to be safe. We like to feel like we're part of, again, we don't like uncertainty, so we like to feel like we belong. And then that sense of, I guess, security and hope, and we've spoken about hope, that you could, that blueprint of having role models, if you like, within your community of going, they've been through this. And even if you don't think you can be quite there, but there is hope that you can get to the other end. And I think when someone's gone through, whether it's a death or a divorce or anything like that, naturally we will shrink in on ourselves because we're trying to protect ourselves. And so it's incredible for someone to help lift us out of that and say, I know this feels like it'll never end and that you'll never be able to overcome this pain, but you will. And it might take 2 years, it might take 12 years, it might take 20, but you will.
And I love the saying, if you can't see, you can't be. And that applies to many, many things. For another conversation, it was for me being Korean Australian and not seeing any Asians on TV shows when I was growing up. Maybe the one Asian I think there was maybe an Asian presenter on Play School when I was young, and I was like, oh, wow, and that was it. If you can't see in leadership, in so many things, if you can't see, you can't be. If you can't see that someone has been through similar, and that's why I think the Western world is so bad at it, because so many people haven't been given the opportunity to talk about their experience. Or so many women I've met have said, I have not counted my child that I lost in my count of children because it just wasn't a thing to do 50, 60 years ago. So I actually have 3 children, but I've always told people 2. And now I feel like I can say that. And so I hope for future generations, for other people that go through really shit times, is that now there's so many more conversations about it. There's so many more shows. There's so many more series. There's so many more resources out there, but it can be hard to find your people. So it takes some effort to search and find it.
Yeah, and it takes a bravery, doesn't it? Because as you've just said, you have to see to be type thing. And if you can't, then you need to have a really good imagination. But to have a good imagination, you need to be really brave because you're putting yourself out there.
And when you've experienced trauma, often your ability to imagine is gone.
Yes.
And so then to imagine a world where you are okay, almost impossible, because that part of the brain literally does shut down. And because your working model of the world has changed and has been flipped on its head, you can't imagine what the future looks like.
No. Well, first, imagination is a feature of our brain, cognition, that we can allow if all our other needs are met, right? But also for people in the trauma, to have hope means to have vulnerability, and that's, for some people, you can't have that. In terms of not having a blueprint, if you like, or not having a feasible, workable, appropriate way of expressing grief or whatever that works for you but you can't find in society. Man, we see this play out in parenting and men and in their ability to deal with emotions and stuff like that, because it's seen as a weak thing, as a vulnerable thing to show emotion. Now, I think I can see where this comes from, because even as a child, we didn't like to see big emotions, because big emotions means uncertainty. Big emotions means that person isn't regulated. So I get where it comes from, but it's gone too far. And so then we've got people who were taught and had modelled, and generations of modelling, where showing emotion, feeling emotion, acknowledging their emotions has just been squashed. And now they don't know how to deal with it or even recognise it within themselves. And I, unfortunately, and you through your work, unfortunately, we only see the tip of the people who have even some understanding that maybe is not helpful and that they'd like to change that. Many don't.
So I guess you could say that being emotional is a gift. Being able to express emotions is a gift.
I think having insight and being able to, we are very fortunate if we can do a body scan and understand that we are not our emotions. If we have the cognition, and again, not everyone does, but if we have the metacognition to understand that, and we're back to boring CBT, but it has its part of play, doesn't it? That we are separate from our thoughts and our behaviour and our emotions, and that we are not our emotions. And in fact, our emotions are our body's way of signalling to us that something's out of equilibrium, right? That's powerful. That's really, really powerful to know. When we recognise that, then sometimes you don't need a therapist anymore.
Oh, yeah, that is a really, really strong message that I don't think many people would realise or give it the time to think about. Last topic I wanted to cover off with Pippa was about this sense of guilt, and it comes through what I've experienced in many conversations with all sorts of different types of grief and situations, is that there's always this sense of guilt. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think for Pippa, and having had animals myself and having to make you can't see me making inverted commas, but having to make a decision and feeling like you have a choice to put that animal out of its misery. And I guess what I would say to that, because absolutely it's loud and clear, right? But I guess what I would say to that is that it's not a choice, and you've spoken about the choiceless choice. And it's such an uncomfortable thing for a human to be given supposedly this power of life over death. But I don't think it is. And I think it would be really helpful if we start changing the way of expressing that, because the choice isn't life or death. The choice is, how long does the suffering last? And then all of a sudden then it's not a choice anymore. So we just need to be really careful how we word that, and I guess especially with ourselves. But yeah, absolutely it comes up. And I guess also to help with that is that we can feel guilt and feel relief and happiness all at once. And even for people who don't necessarily, inverted commas, have a choice, but feeling relief and guilt when someone who's been through terminal illness or when that finally ends. So there's the guilt for feeling relief and that person's suffering's gone, and being pleased about that. So it's a normal human emotion. And I guess, as we just said about recognising that we're not our emotions, we are not our thoughts, we are not our behaviours. And because of that, it is possible to hold multiple emotions at once.
And that's a really, really good reminder to separate ourselves from that guilt, because I think I know that I weave in guilt to reflect who I am as a person, that I'm a bad person because I do feel guilt of what happened. And even though it was a choiceless choice, I've spoken before about how I will still always feel the guilt because it happened in my body and I somehow caught it, that it is my fault. But I really like that reminder that we are not our emotions. And even though it's very heavy, and I can feel it even now sitting in my gut where the guilt sits, that it is not a reflection of who I am as a person. And I think that's why we get very confused about guilt.
I think with guilt as well, and we've talked about primary and secondary emotions, is recognising that sometimes with guilt we feel like we made a decision or we could have avoided something happening, right?
Yep.
And just thinking about what you've just said, we have to, and again, it comes from being able to step back and have insight, and that's really, really challenging, right? But with guilt, I wonder if it's helpful to sit with that and to go, where has that come from? And in an example you've just given us, like, it was my body, it came onto me, it's my responsibility to keep all these bad things out, right? And then fair enough, like you can have that. But then also question that and go, is it actually possible for you to keep all the bad pathogens out of your body? No, it's not. There is a myriad of beautiful germs that get brought home by our kids every single day, and we can't keep them out. And so there is no bad emotion. All emotions are beneficial and helpful, but the benefit comes from unpacking it and seeing where that comes from. And so does that sense of guilt come from your schema of what it is to be, a mother and having the incredible gift of being able to create life?
Yeah, that's true.
And what that signifies for you. But I guess I would challenge, just because you can do that and that you can protect yourself and your kids from so many things, it's impossible to protect them from everything.
That is very true. And the scary reality of what life is. Yeah. Well, thank you very much I think I got a bit of free therapy there as well. Thank you very much, Mai, for joining me.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening. This podcast is dedicated to my son Herbert and to all the fellow grievers out there. I'm sorry that you're here. Be kind to others, but mostly to yourself. Before we wrap up, I'd just like to mention that whilst I do have a degree in behavioural science and have spent years educating myself and researching the topics of trauma and mental health, I'm not a licensed therapist, counsellor or psychologist. Everything I share here is based on personal experience and things I've learnt through education. This podcast is for informational or entertainment purposes only and isn't the substitute for professional advice. If you're struggling, please reach out to a GP or a qualified therapist. You're not alone and there is help available.